David was frustrated again, pacing alone in his small apartment. That evening he had walked out of his third job in 2 years, anger burning in his chest. Once more, he felt he'd been treated unfairly. His boss had dared to criticize his work in a meeting, and David's pride simply couldn't swallow it. He replayed the scene in his mind. The conference room, the pointed remarks, the way his colleagues' eyes darted away awkwardly as he defended himself too harshly. Now the adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a bitter aftertaste of regret and humiliation. It wasn't just the job. A similar pattern had haunted him in other parts of life too. He recalled how his last relationship ended in a blaze of arguments, with his girlfriend accusing him of never listening, of always turning things around to blame her. At the time, he dismissed her words as nonsense born out of her own issues. But tonight, alone with the quiet walls of his apartment, those words echoed uneasily in his mind. He sank onto his couch and ran a hand through his hair. "Why does this keep happening to me?" he muttered, to no one in particular. In the stillness of the room, the question lingered, unanswered. David had always seen himself as the victim of other people's flaws, unreasonable bosses, overly sensitive partners, friends who didn't appreciate him enough. Yet an unsettling thought had been creeping in lately, one he tried very hard to push away. What if the problem is not just them? He sighed and stood up, the silence weighing on him. He needed a glass of water to cool the heat of his racing thoughts. In the dim bathroom light, David turned the faucet and splashed cold water on his face. Droplets trailed down into the sink as he gripped the edges, trying to steady himself. When he finally raised his head and looked into the mirror, he saw a tired face staring back. Dark circles under his eyes, jaw clenched tight. He barely recognized himself, not physically, but in a deeper sense. When had he become this bitter, defensive person? He remembered being younger, more easygoing, believing the world was open to him. Now he felt trapped in a loop of his own making, though he couldn't quite figure out how to break it. "Who are you?" he whispered to his reflection, half ashamed at talking to himself. He expected only silence, but to his surprise, an answer came, not in sound, but in his mind, clear as a bell. "I am you," the reflection seemed to say, lips not moving. Yet David heard the words. He blinked, thinking he was imagining things. The reflection in the mirror tilted its head slightly, eyes boring into David's own. David's heart pounded. Was he dreaming? The man in the mirror looked exactly like him, of course. But there was a calmness in the mirror. David's eyes that David didn't feel. He rubbed his eyes and took a step back, but the strange spell didn't break. In his mind, or was it truly from the mirror? He heard the voice again. "Shall we talk?" it asked. David's mouth went dry. This had to be a stress-induced hallucination, he thought. Perhaps the emotional turmoil of the day had pushed him over the edge. But a part of him felt compelled to continue, to see where this would go, hallucination or not. He nodded faintly at the mirror. "All right," he whispered. "Talk. Or think. Whatever this is. If you're me, what could you possibly say that I don't already know?" The reflection's expression softened. "Quite a lot." The voice resonated in David's mind. "Let's start with tonight. The job. You walked out again. You already know this pattern can't continue. So why did you really leave?" "Because my boss was a jerk," David snapped aloud, defensiveness flaring up instantly. "He humiliated me in front of everyone. He questioned my competence. What was I supposed to do? Just sit there and take it?" The reflection didn't appear angry or accusatory. It just gazed patiently. "Yes, I remember how it felt. But think, was he truly humiliating you? Or was he offering critique on your work, like a manager is supposed to?" David opened his mouth to retort, then closed it. He replayed the meeting more honestly now. His boss had pointed out a few mistakes in the project David submitted. There was an error in the data, and some sections were incomplete. It was factual, if a bit blunt. The humiliation David felt was it entirely his boss's doing, or was it his own shame at having messed up and been called out? David felt a flush of embarrassment creeping up his neck. Maybe I overreacted, he admitted in a small voice. But he didn't have to be so blunt. Perhaps, the inner voice conceded. But haven't we been here before? Different faces, different places, but the same reaction. Why do we bristle so much at any suggestion we might be wrong? David braced his hands on the sink. The cool porcelain grounded him as he struggled to answer. Memories surfaced unbidden. A childhood report card with red marks, his father's disappointed frown, the time he dropped a pass in a high school football game and felt the sting of letting the team down. He had learned early on to hate the feeling of being at fault. Criticism, even gentle, pricked at wounds he'd long tried to ignore. I guess. I can't stand feeling like I failed, he murmured, eyes downcast. No one enjoys it, the voice replied. But think. You tend to explode, to push people away to protect yourself. And in doing so, you end up alone, every time. The reflection's eyes, his eyes, gleamed with a mix of compassion and sternness. A lump formed in David's throat. Was that true? He thought about his ex-girlfriend, the look of hurt on her face during their final fight. She had pleaded with him to listen, to stop twisting her concerns back onto her. He recalled shouting at her, saying she was always finding faults, that nothing was ever good enough for her. The memory now made him wince. At the time, it felt justified, but looking back with a cooler mind, he could finally see the desperation in her eyes, how she was fighting for the relationship while he was fighting to be right. And when she walked out the door in tears, he told himself good riddance, that he didn't need someone who didn't appreciate him. Only later, lying in a bed half empty, did a faint voice inside wonder if he had made a terrible mistake. The mirror voice was gentle now. It's hard to look at ourselves honestly, I know. David realized his cheeks were wet. He wasn't sure when he started crying, but the tears were flowing freely now, dripping onto the countertop. He didn't wipe them, letting the pain come out at last. The reflection continued. You've been running from your own reflection for a long time. It's easier to blame the mirror for what you see than to change yourself. But deep down, you know the truth. All these broken pieces of your life. The jobs, the relationships. The common thread is you, David. Each word hit like a gentle blow, soft but undeniable. David's shoulders trembled. It hurt to hear, yet some part of him felt relief too, as if acknowledging it lifted a weight he'd been hauling around in denial. I've been such a fool, he whispered, voice cracking. I've hurt people. Hurt myself. I didn't want to see it. The reflection, his inner voice, seemed to nod. Awareness is painful, but it's the first step toward growth. You're not a bad person, David. You've just been blind to your own hand in your suffering. The eyes in the mirror glistened with the same tears David felt on his own cheeks. It's like you've been driving with a dirty windshield, thinking the road is bleak, when in fact it's your view that's obscured. But you can clean it. You can change how you see and how you act. David closed his eyes, the analogy sinking in. All this time, he thought the world was treating him unfairly, when maybe he'd never given it a clear chance. He'd been so quick to assume attack, to guard his ego, that he never truly listened or accepted any imperfection in himself. It was like a dirty windshield. Everything looked distorted through his defensiveness and pride. He took a deep, shuddering breath and looked at himself again. Truly looked, as if meeting a stranger. How do I change? He asked softly. I don't want to keep living like this, pushing everyone away, ruining opportunities. But I'm scared. I've been this way for so long. His reflection gave a kind smile, one David realized he hadn't seen on his own face in ages, a smile of understanding and hope. It won't happen overnight, but you've done the hardest part. You've faced yourself. Start by acknowledging when you're wrong, even if it stings. Apologize to those you've hurt, if you can. Listen more, especially when your first instinct is to defend. When you feel that anger rising, take a moment before you react. Ask yourself why you're truly upset. Often, it's not the other person's words, but the fear or hurt they trigger in you. David nodded, taking mental notes as if receiving instructions for a project. But this project was himself. He knew what the voice was talking about. Just earlier that day, beneath his outrage at his boss, there was embarrassment and fear that he wasn't good enough. And with his ex, beneath his defensiveness, there was fear of rejection, fear of not being lovable if he wasn't perfect. If he could recognize those vulnerable feelings, maybe he wouldn't lash out so fiercely. I think I understand, David said. I need to be more honest with myself and others, and probably more humble. He managed a weak chuckle, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. It felt strange and freeing to say, I was wrong. I have been wrong a lot. We all are sometimes, the reflection replied. Being wrong doesn't make you worthless. It just makes you human. By seeing yourself clearly, the good and the bad, you give yourself the chance to become better. Self-awareness is a lifelong mirror. You have to keep looking into it, even when you don't like what you see, especially then. David reached out and touched the cool glass of the mirror, as if to affirm that the man he saw there was real, that this conversation was real, or at least the insight it brought. Thank you, he whispered, not exactly sure who or what he was thanking. Perhaps that deeper part of himself that finally had a voice. Perhaps the quiet apartment, the solitude that allowed him to break down. Or maybe just fate, for bringing him to this moment of reckoning. He straightened up, noticing that his face in the mirror, though tear-streaked and puffy, looked somehow softer than before. He looked tired, yes, but also like someone who had survived a storm and now saw the light of morning approaching. There was a hint of gentleness in his own eyes that he hadn't seen in a long time. As he turned off the bathroom light and climbed into bed, David felt exhausted, but a different kind of exhausted, like after a hard workout that hurts, but leaves you stronger. His pillow welcomed him, and he sank into it with a sigh. His mind was quieter than it had been in years. Thoughts of his boss, of his ex-girlfriend, of all the people and situations he'd blamed, drifted through his head. But now, instead of anger or bitterness, he felt a somber resolve and a budding determination. He would make amends where he could. He would try, day by day, to be more mindful of himself and kinder to others. In the darkness, David closed his eyes, the image of his own face in the mirror still clear in his mind. He felt strangely comforted that he was no longer running from it. Yes, he had faults. Yes, he had been blind to them. But now his eyes were a little more open. And as painful as it had been to confront, it felt like a relief to finally see the truth. In that truth, he sensed the faint outline of a new path, one where each step of self-awareness would lead to better steps in the world outside. Before sleep took him, David quietly promised himself, tomorrow he would start fresh. He would face his life with eyes unclouded, with that mirror in his mind as a guide. And if he ever forgot and started to slip into old habits, he knew now that he could always return to that mirror, look himself in the eye, and remember the conversation that changed everything. That night, for the first time in a long time, David slept with a sense of peace, the kind that only comes after you've finally been truly honest with yourself.